It started like most neighborhood problems do, quiet, subtle, and disguised as friendliness. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where lawns were trimmed sharp, where every driveway looked like it came out of a catalog, and where everyone smiled, even when they didn't mean it. The HOA was always present, always watching, but most of the time, they stuck to their usual turf. Parking complaints, fence color codes, those little passive-aggressive notes slipped under your door. Nothing unusual, until Karen showed up. Karen moved in a few houses down. Within the first week, she introduced herself as if she were royalty. "Hi, I'm Karen. I'm on the board now," she said, not even 5 minutes into our first conversation. She asked a few too many questions, complimented my house, but in that backhanded way. Then she brought up the pool. "Wow, a pool in your backyard? Must be nice. You know, not many of us have one. It'd be great if people in the community had access to." I smiled and brushed it off, assuming it was just small talk. People say things. But Karen wasn't just saying it. Over the next couple weeks, I noticed her walking past my backyard more often than anyone should. Sometimes alone, sometimes with her kids, sometimes with other board members in tow, pointing toward the fence like she was giving a tour. It got weird. See, my pool isn't some community perk. It's private, fully fenced, on my personal property. I paid for the maintenance, the cleaning, the insurance, everything. It wasn't built with HOA funds, and it wasn't included in any shared use agreement. Still, the way Karen acted, you'd think I was keeping the neighborhood's holy grail locked up in my backyard. Then came the hints. At first, it was casual. She'd say things like, "If I had a pool, I'd totally let the other moms come swim. It's just being neighborly." Then the note started showing up, handwritten, no signature, but it was always the same voice. "Would love to arrange a swim day for the community. Let's open that gate." One even said, "Don't be selfish. Sharing is what good neighbors do." That's when I installed the first set of cameras. Not because I was scared, but because I could feel it escalating. Karen didn't like boundaries, physical or otherwise. And I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me into opening my personal space for a neighborhood pool party she could parade around as her own victory. I kept to myself, stayed polite. But every time she walked past, her stare got colder, her comments got sharper. She didn't ask anymore, she expected. Then one afternoon, I caught her in the backyard, not in it exactly, but leaning over the fence, trying to unlatch the gate from the outside, while her 2 kids stood next to her in swimsuits, towels around their necks. I was in the kitchen and saw it on the monitor. I walked outside slowly, camera rolling from the chest mount on my shirt. "Oh, we were just checking if anyone was home," she said with a forced smile. "Thought we could just hop in real quick. The kids are dying in this heat." I told her firmly, but without yelling, that this was private property, not HOA land, not a shared resource, not public, just mine. That smile faded. "You don't have to be so aggressive," she snapped. "It's just a pool. You act like you're the king of the block." She gathered her kids and stormed off, shouting something about entitled people and bringing this up at the next meeting. That's when I knew it was far from over, because Karen wasn't the kind to take no quietly. And with her new title on the board, she thought she had power. What she didn't know was that I wasn't some clueless pushover. I had cameras. I had documents. I had every rule and regulation printed, highlighted, and ready. And most importantly, I had a lawyer on speed dial, not because I wanted trouble, but because trouble had walked through my gate and called it community spirit. It didn't take long after that backyard incident for things to shift from annoying to outright hostile. I thought maybe Karen had gotten the message when I caught her trying to open the pool gate, that she'd finally understand the difference between private property and HOA managed space. But if anything, it just lit a fuse. 2 days later, I found a letter taped to my front door. Not mailed, not placed gently. Taped, with thick packaging tape, like someone wanted to make sure I saw it and couldn't ignore it. The letterhead said, HOA Committee for Community Use Planning. I'd never heard of that group before. The paper was printed in Comic Sans, of all things, and read like a school group project. It claimed that my pool was under consideration for shared limited use by neighborhood residents, citing increasing demand for recreation space and the need for inclusive community practices. I laughed at first, because surely this was a joke, a fake notice, or at worst, a petty attempt to scare me. But then I saw it. At the bottom of the page were signatures, not just Karen's. 3 other HOA board members had signed it too. One of them I didn't even know. Another was someone I'd spoken to maybe twice, always about the length of someone's grass or trash bin violations. Now they were trying to repurpose my pool. I decided it was time to get serious. That afternoon, I called my lawyer, explained the situation, sent him the letter, the video from my camera when Karen tried to enter the gate, and screenshots of the earlier anonymous notes. He didn't even hesitate. "This is harassment," he said, "and if they keep pushing, we'll hit back hard." But before we could do anything formal, Karen made her next move. It was a Saturday morning. Blue skies, birds chirping. You know, one of those peaceful moments you don't even realize you're enjoying until someone ruins it. I was cleaning up near the pool when I heard voices out front. Not just talking, arguing. I stepped out to see Karen standing by the sidewalk, again with her kids. Only this time, there were 2 other people with her. One was another board member, and the other I didn't recognize. All of them were looking at my house like they were inspecting it, measuring something, discussing. I walked out and asked, "Need something?" Karen looked me dead in the eyes and said, "We're assessing potential community risks. The fence around your pool doesn't meet our visibility standards." Visibility standards? For a backyard pool? I pointed out that my fence had been approved years ago, long before she moved in, that it met all city codes, and that the HOA had already signed off on the design. But she wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in pushing, seeing how far she could go before I cracked. That evening, I checked my inbox, and sure enough, there was an HOA infraction notice. Claimed my fence was opaque and not aligned with the openness guidelines of the neighborhood. It recommended replacing it with shared view fencing. I could feel my jaw clench. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. It wasn't even about the HOA, really. It was Karen, plain and simple. She decided I was the obstacle in her way, and she was going to grind me down until I gave in. What she didn't realize was I wasn't wired to fold. Not when I was right. Not when I had proof. Not when the law was on my side. So I took a step she wasn't expecting. I didn't just push back. I went public. Quietly, subtly, I posted on the neighborhood forum, very calmly outlining what had happened. Just the facts. No anger. No accusations. Just a timeline, the notices, the gate incident, and a couple questions like, has anyone else been asked to give up private property for shared use? By noon the next day, there were over 50 comments. Most of them were on my side. People were shocked. Some shared their own run-ins with Karen. Others admitted they'd felt bullied too, just hadn't spoken up. The tide was turning. But Karen didn't take that lightly, because what she did next was something I still shake my head at. She called the cops. On me. The knock at my door was sharp. 3 quick pounds that meant business. Not the kind of knock you get from a neighbor or a delivery driver. I looked through the peephole and immediately saw the uniforms. 2 officers, standing straight, hands on their belts, eyes scanned in front of my house like they were expecting trouble. I stepped outside calmly and asked, "Can I help you?" One officer nodded politely. The other looked more cautious. "We got a call about a possible safety concern regarding a child near a swimming pool. You mind if we take a look?" It took everything in me not to laugh right there. Safety concern? Child near a pool? There hadn't been anyone near the pool all day, and I already knew who made the call. I gestured toward the backyard gate and said, "Sure, let me show you the footage first." I invited them in and pulled up the security cam feed on my TV. I had 4 angles covering the pool, and I scrubbed through the last 12 hours of footage. Nothing but birds and leaves. Not a single person, no kids, no accidents, no trespassers. They watched quietly. The officer who'd spoken first nodded slowly. "Looks like everything's in order here." The other officer asked, "Do you know who might have called this in?" I hesitated for just a second before saying, "It's possible someone from the HOA board is upset I won't allow them to use my private pool. I've had some unusual interactions lately." I kept my voice steady, calm, measured. The last thing I wanted was to sound offensive. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. They exchanged a glance. "All right," the first one said. "Well, everything checks out here. But just so you know, a false emergency call is a serious issue. We'll make a note in the report." After they left, I stood at the door for a moment, taking a deep breath. Karen had crossed a line. It wasn't just annoying letters or ridiculous HOA notices anymore. She had used emergency services to try and scare me, to make a point, to send a message. And that's when I decided I wasn't just going to play defense anymore. I called my lawyer again. This time, I didn't just send him the video footage and the violation letters. I forwarded the neighborhood forum thread, the comments, the timestamps on the false 911 call, and even screenshots of Karen standing outside my house with a measuring tape. He didn't waste a minute. "I'm filing a cease and desist and drafting a formal complaint to the HOA," he said. "And you should consider pressing charges for harassment and false reporting." Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzz was building. People saw the cops at my house. They started asking questions. But the beauty of having everything on camera meant I didn't need to say much. I let the facts speak. And the facts were brutal for Karen. Turns out, I wasn't the first person she had tried to push around. A few neighbors messaged me privately, saying she'd threatened to fine them over ridiculous things like wind chimes, Christmas lights, even leaving a garden hose out for too long. But this time, with actual police involved and with video evidence showing how wrong she was, people started speaking louder. The HOA board was under pressure. At the next monthly meeting, which I usually avoided like the plague, I showed up early, quiet, professional. I had copies of everything in a neat folder. I asked for time to speak. When I stood up and laid it all out, Karen's harassment, her obsession with my pool, the unauthorized notes, the attempted gate entry, the false police report, it was dead silent in that room. I didn't yell. I didn't insult. I just stated the facts and left a flash drive with the board. Then I walked out. But I didn't even make it to my driveway before I got a text from one of the other board members. It said, "We didn't know it had gone this far. She's done." The next morning felt different. There wasn't any official announcement or public apology, but something in the air had changed. For the first time in weeks, Karen didn't walk past my house. No slow stroller pushing, no nosy glances toward the backyard, no fake smiles, just silence. And in a place like this, silence is everything. But I knew better than to assume it was over. People like Karen don't just disappear. They plot, they wait, they regroup. And sure enough, that same evening, I received an email, not from Karen, but from the HOA's general inbox. It said there was going to be an emergency board meeting, and I was encouraged to attend. No details were given, but I had a feeling I knew what it was about. I showed up 5 minutes early. The room was already half full. Residents had clearly heard about what happened, probably more than I expected, judging by the looks and nods I got as I walked in. Karen was there too, sitting stiffly in the front row with her arms crossed and lips pursed. She didn't look at me. Not once. The meeting started with the usual nonsense, budget talks, landscaping issues, mailbox damage. But it wasn't long before the president of the board cleared his throat and looked toward my direction. "We'd like to address a matter that's recently come to our attention regarding homeowner harassment and misuse of HOA authority." You could hear the room shift. People sat up straighter. All eyes moved to Karen. Without naming names, he laid out a brief overview of what had happened. The gate incident, the fake pool sharing letter, the so-called safety call to the police. He used phrases like exceeding authority, privacy violations, and inappropriate use of HOA power. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew. Then came the surprise. One of the board members, a woman named Denise, stood up. She was the one who had quietly texted me after the last meeting. She said, "We've reviewed video footage, legal documentation, and multiple written statements. Based on what we've seen, the board will be voting to remove one of our members for conduct unbecoming of a representative of this community. Karen stood up before they could say anything more. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're all acting like I committed a crime. I was trying to improve the neighborhood. That pool should be for everyone. I shouldn't be punished for caring. But no one clapped, no one nodded, and no one supported her this time. Denise calmly responded, "This isn't about caring. It's about boundaries, Karen, and you crossed too many." The vote passed 4-1. Karen didn't wait to hear the rest. She stormed out of the room, her heels clicking louder than any word spoken. The door slammed behind her. People whispered. A few shook their heads. The room exhaled. But even as I sat there, listening to the meeting wind down, I had a strange feeling in my gut. Relief, yes, but not peace. Because when someone like Karen loses publicly, they don't just go away. They regroup, and they come back even more bitter. Sure enough, I didn't have to wait long to see what her next move would be. A few days later, a notice appeared in my mailbox, not from the HOA, not from the city, but from a private law firm. It was a formal letter accusing me of creating a hostile environment and public defamation of a homeowner's character. It was laughable, really. Karen was now trying to sue me for embarrassing her. My lawyer read the letter, chuckled, and tossed it in the shred pile. "Let her try," he said. "She won't get far." But still, I couldn't help but feel a little unnerved. The lengths she was willing to go, just to control something that wasn't hers, were beyond reason. And though the board had voted her out and the cops had filed a warning, she still wasn't letting it go. I installed 2 more security cameras, one above the garage, the other facing the sidewalk. I didn't want trouble, but if trouble came again, I'd be ready, because it was clear Karen hadn't hit her breaking point yet, and I had a feeling she was about to try one last stunt. It started with a strange delivery. A big, clunky box dropped right at my doorstep on a Monday morning. No return label, no sender info. Just my name, printed in bold black ink. I stood there, staring at it for a while, debating whether I should even touch it. Eventually, curiosity won. I opened it carefully, half expecting it to be empty or filled with nonsense. But inside was something that actually made me laugh. A plastic kiddie pool and a note that said, "Asterisk, since you won't share your real one, maybe you can use this." Asterisk. No signature, of course. But I didn't need one. It was petty, so deeply immature that it was almost funny. Almost. But I knew exactly what this was. Karen wasn't giving up. She just shifted tactics again. From threats to sabotage to legal games, now to flat-out mocking me. At this point, it felt like she was trying to provoke me into reacting, into making a mistake she could twist into a real legal issue. But I wasn't biting. I set up a camera on the porch. High resolution, full coverage. If she so much as stepped near my lawn, I'd have it. And I stored the kiddie pool in the garage. Not out of fear, just as evidence. Because something told me this wasn't the last trick she had up her sleeve. And sure enough, the very next weekend, things got even stranger. It was a hot Saturday afternoon. Perfect pool weather. I was out back skimming leaves on the surface when I heard what sounded like laughter and splashing. At first, I thought it was just the usual neighborhood noise echoing across the fences. But when I walked around the front gate, I froze. 3 kids were in my backyard, in my pool, uninvited, and standing just outside the gate, arms folded, smug as ever, was Karen. I stormed out the side gate, keeping my voice controlled, and asked her, "What do you think you're doing?" She didn't even flinch. "They're just kids," she said. "It's hot. They needed a place to cool off. And frankly, you've been incredibly selfish about this whole thing." My pulse spiked. I looked at the kids and calmly told them to get out of the pool. They did, quickly. They seemed confused, maybe even a little scared. I wasn't angry at them. They were just pawns. But Karen? She stared at me like she'd won some invisible battle. I turned and pointed at the camera mounted on my patio roof. "This is private property," I said. "You've now trespassed, encouraged minors to trespass, and ignore multiple warnings. I hope you smile for camera. Her face changed then. Not fear, but surprise. Like she hadn't considered that I might still be recording everything. And then she did what she always does when cornered. She lashed out. "You don't scare me," she snapped. "I'm calling the police." I almost laughed. "Please do," I replied. "You already tried that once, remember?" She turned on her heel and stormed off. The kids ran after her, dripping wet and silent. I filed a police report that evening. With video footage, timestamps, and my lawyer's advice, it wasn't just a complaint. It was formal, and the officer who took the report didn't look surprised. In fact, he muttered something under his breath about another call from Oakwood Estates as he typed it in. 2 days later, I received a visit, not from the cops, but from a city inspector. Apparently, someone had reported unsafe construction in my backyard. The inspector was polite, almost embarrassed as he walked around. After 5 minutes, he shook his head. "There's nothing wrong here," he said. "Sorry to bother you." I asked him who filed the complaint. He just smirked. "Can't say. But let's just say you're not the first person she's tried this on." Karen was unraveling. But even so, she wasn't done. Each time I stayed quiet, handled things by the book, she seemed to get more desperate. Like watching her own control slip through her fingers was driving her mad. And even though I had the law, the cameras, the HOA vote, and the neighbors on my side, something deep down told me we hadn't reached the end of this story just yet. Because people like her don't know when to stop. The next phase of Karen's antics wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, creeping in like a shadow you don't notice until it's already behind you. It started with the trash. One morning, I walked outside to find my garbage bins had been tipped over, lids open. Content scattered like a raccoon had thrown a party. But the bags weren't ripped or clawed. They'd just been cut, clean slices down the middle, like with a box cutter. I cleaned it up, a little annoyed, but tried not to assume the worst. The second time it happened, I knew. Karen's house sits 2 lots down, just around the curve of the street. I reviewed my camera footage. Right around 1:43 a.m., a figure crept onto my driveway. Hoodie pulled up, gloves, head down. They didn't look at the cameras. But they didn't need to. The build, the posture, the little limp she always tried to hide from twisting her ankle last year while yelling at kids for skateboarding too loud. It was unmistakable. I sent the footage to my lawyer. Again, he responded with one line. "She's begging for charges at this point." Still, I didn't respond publicly. I didn't shout about it to the neighbors. I let her dig her own hole. But in the background, I made some quiet changes. I upgraded the fence, installed motion-triggered lights that flooded the yard like daylight the second someone stepped near. I even added a discreet camera in a decorative birdhouse aimed at the sidewalk. By the 3rd week, I had a full file: trash, trespassing, the false inspector call, the police report, and now this. And with each new incident, more neighbors started to notice, not just the chaos at my place, but little things that there's too. One woman, Andrea, said she came home to find Karen walking her dog and just happened to be looking into Andrea's garage when it was open. Another neighbor said his tires had been mysteriously low 3 weeks in a row. All of us had the same feeling. She was spiraling. Still, I kept calm. Until the mailbox incident. It happened on a windy Thursday afternoon. I had just gotten back from work, and as I pulled into my driveway, I saw it. The post of my mailbox split in half. The whole box was lying face down in the dirt like it had been run over. Again, this was the 3rd time in 2 months. I knew it wasn't kids. I knew it wasn't wind. And I knew it wasn't an accident. The tire marks in the grass, always at the same angle, always ending in the same place. They made it clear someone had backed over it. On purpose. Slowly. Probably just enough to make it look like a careless turn. But not this time. This time, I had a plan. The very next day, I installed a new mailbox. But not just any mailbox. This one was reinforced steel. Solid posts sunk into a concrete base. It looked like any ordinary mailbox from the road. But hidden inside, it was a full interior frame, designed to withstand a truck's weight. I positioned it carefully. not in a way that invited trouble, just right where always was. I cleaned the tire tracks, resodded the lawn, and waited. And like clockwork, it happened. 3 nights later, a low rumble outside woke me. Not loud, but steady. I checked the front camera feed. There it was, Karen's SUV creeping toward the edge of my lawn. She stopped, reversed, lined herself up, then, slow and smooth, she rolled back just far enough to bump the mailbox. But this time it didn't fall. Instead, the steel post stood its ground and her bumper cracked. The sound of metal meeting metal, unforgiving and sharp, rang out, followed by a sudden slam of her brakes. She threw the car into drive and took off like nothing happened. What she didn't know was that I had footage from 3 angles. Her plate, her face, the exact moment of impact. It was all recorded. And I wasn't going to keep this one quiet. The next morning, I walked out to check the damage in daylight. Sure enough, the mailbox was perfectly fine. Barely a dent in the steel. But the real surprise came when I spotted the trail of shattered red plastic scattered across the edge of my lawn. A chunk of Karen's rear tail light had broken clean off and was just sitting there like a little trophy. I picked it up, held it in my hand for a second, and smiled. I didn't need it, of course. I already had the video footage, time-stamped from 3 different angles. The plate number was crystal clear, and there was no doubt about who had been driving. But that busted tail light, that was just the icing on the cake. It was physical proof of her intent. Not only had she tried to destroy my property, again, but this time her little stunt had backfired in a very real, very expensive way. I forwarded everything to my lawyer that afternoon. He didn't just laugh. He told me this was the moment we had been waiting for, the moment where it all added up. He drafted a formal civil complaint, citing vandalism, harassment, and repeated trespassing. And not just over one incident, over pattern. A pattern stretching back months. The fake letter, the police call, the trespassing, the trash, the kid in the pool, the mailbox attacks. Everything. But I wasn't stopping there. That same day, I took a flash drive to the HOA board. I asked for a few minutes to speak at the next meeting. They didn't hesitate. The board president had grown tired of Karen's behavior, just like everyone else. So when I stood up and played the video of her SUV crunching against my mailbox, there wasn't a single person in that room who defended her. What followed was silence, then murmurs. People who had been scared to speak now started raising their hands. Neighbors began sharing their own experiences. Stories of Karen lurking near their fences, making offhand comments about their visitors. Even rumors that she tried to report one resident's dog as aggressive just to get it removed. Denise, the same board member who'd helped vote her out earlier, said it best. This isn't just a neighbor feud anymore. This is someone trying to control the entire neighborhood by fear and petty harassment. Karen wasn't at the meeting, but that didn't matter. The board unanimously agreed to ban her from any future HOA leadership roles. Her access to community meetings was suspended for 6 months. And though the board couldn't formally evict her, they did something almost better. They sent an official recommendation to the city requesting a restraining order to be considered due to escalating community disturbances. Meanwhile, my lawyer filed a complaint. We served her the papers the very next morning. I wasn't home when it happened, but my cameras caught the moment. A process server, plainclothed and calm, walked right up to her porch and handed her the envelope. Karen looked confused at first, then furious. She crumpled the papers in her fist and shouted something I couldn't quite make out from the audio. But what struck me most was what she did next. She didn't slam the door. She didn't run inside. She just stood there on her porch for several minutes, staring down at the papers, not moving. Maybe, for the first time, she realized this wasn't a game anymore. Later that day, she called a town mediator, someone the HOA offers to help solve neighbor disputes. Except this wasn't a dispute. This was documented harassment with police reports, video footage, and community testimony. Still, I agreed to the meeting. Not because I believed she would apologize, but because I wanted everything on record. And that's exactly what I got. She showed up late, flustered, and defensive. She started with excuses, how she thought she was protecting the neighborhood, how I had been unwelcoming and passive-aggressive. But when the mediator asked why she had run over the mailbox, 3 times she stumbled, and when we played the video of her car hitting the reinforced post and driving off, she fell completely silent. For the first time in this entire saga, Karen didn't have anything to say.